In the world of high-stakes geopolitics, there is no such thing as a coincidence. There is only cause and effect. For weeks, the world assumed Donald Trump's sudden, explosive threat to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge was a trade tactic, a blunt instrument designed to bully Canada into submission. It fit the narrative. The America First president putting national interests above all else. But this morning, that narrative didn't just crack. It shattered. A bombshell report from the New York Times has uncovered a timeline that is too precise to be accidental. It reveals that just hours before the president took to Truth Social to threaten a vital artery of North American trade, a private meeting took place in Washington. It wasn't with a trade representative. It wasn't with a national security advisor. It was with the billionaire owner of the only competitor to that bridge. What was once sold to the American public as national security is now being investigated by U.S. lawmakers as potential billionaire corruption. And while Washington descends into chaos over these revelations, one man in Ottawa is watching calmly, having predicted this exact implosion. Today on Canada SR, we expose the secret meeting, the billionaire monopoly, and the strategic patience Mark Carney used to turn Trump's own corruption against him. To understand the magnitude of this scandal, we must act as forensic investigators. We have to look at the timeline established by explosive new reporting. According to documents now being demanded by the U.S. House Oversight Committee, a closed-door meeting occurred between U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Matthew Moroun. For those who don't know, Moroun is the scion of the family that owns the Ambassador Bridge, a crumbling, privately owned monopoly that has held North American trade in a chokehold for decades.
So there's a call for answers following a reported meeting between the owner of the Ambassador Bridge and U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, a meeting that the New York Times reports happened just before Donald Trump took to Truth Social to say he will block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. CTV's Travis Fortnum joining me now. And Travis, so what are the lawmakers trying to find out, and how could this ultimately affect Windsor?
Yes, well, this is all about whether private business interests influenced a major cross-border decision, and a California congressman on the U.S. House Oversight Committee is now demanding records tied to that reported meeting, wanting to know if it influenced Trump's threat. It was the New York Times who first reported earlier this week that Trump's post to Truth Social followed a meeting between Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Matthew Moroun, whose family owns the Ambassador Bridge.
Let's analyze the implication of that report. Transactional politics is a term often used to describe Trump, but this crosses a line from policy to potential racketeering. The timeline suggests a direct causal link. A billionaire who stands to lose hundreds of millions of dollars in toll revenue meets with the administration. Immediately following that access, the federal government weaponizes its power to block that billionaire's publicly funded competition. This is not a trade war strategy. This is a protection racket. Donald Trump attempted to frame the Gordie Howe blockade as a lever against Canada, but the evidence suggests he was merely acting as the enforcement arm for a private American monopoly. He wasn't fighting for the American worker in Michigan. He was fighting for the Moroun Family Trust Fund. And this miscalculation, confusing private profit for public good, is exactly the weakness Canada has been waiting to exploit. Why would a president risk a diplomatic crisis for a bridge? We have to follow the money. The Ambassador Bridge is an anomaly in the modern world. It is the busiest commercial land border crossing in North America, and it is privately owned. It is a funnel through which 25% of all trade between our two nations flows. For the Moroun family, this isn't infrastructure. It is an infinite money-printing machine.
Congressman Robert Garcia is now calling for emails, texts, and calendar records tied to that meeting, arguing it's unacceptable for a politically connected billionaire to influence trade policy. The Moroun family has long opposed the Gordie Howe Bridge, which would end its monopoly on commercial truck traffic at the busiest border crossing in North America. Garcia warns interference could increase congestion and disrupt U.S.-Canada trade. Speaking.
Let's expand on what enormous revenue actually means. The Gordie Howe International Bridge wasn't just built to move trucks, it was built to break a monopoly. For decades, the Moroun family has operated without serious competition. They could set tolls, neglect maintenance, and dictate the flow of goods because logistics companies had no other choice. The new bridge, funded by Canada, transparent and modern, is an existential threat to their business model. When the Gordie Howe Bridge opens, the Moroun monopoly dies instantly. This explains the desperation, it explains the lobbying, and it explains why Matthew Moroun would need to meet with the Commerce Secretary hours before the blockade announcement. They weren't discussing steel tariffs or lumber prices. They were discussing how to stop the future. But here is where the failed strategist archetype of Donald Trump comes into play. Trump assumed that blocking the bridge would hurt Canada. He failed to realize, or didn't care, that he was stepping into a war between the state of Michigan and a detested local billionaire. He walked into a domestic trap, thinking he was fighting a foreign enemy. This is where the genius of Canada's strategy becomes visible. By refusing to engage in a shouting match, Ottawa allowed American domestic politics to do the heavy lifting. The backlash didn't come from Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney holding a press conference. It came from within the U.S. Congress. Congressman Robert Garcia is now demanding emails, texts, and calendar records. He is looking for the smoking gun, proof that U.S. trade policy was sold to the highest bidder.
Speaking on AM 800, Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib saying, in her opinion, this is just par for the course.
Billionaire corruption goes hand in hand with the White House right now. So it wasn't a surprise to me that Matthew Moroun, the owner of the opposite, literally falling apart Ambassador Bridge, met with Trump administration hours before the president absurdly threatened to block the safer and more efficient Gordie Howe Bridge from opening. The Maroons have always taken this approach of donating to colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans in the United States, in a way that makes them look the other way when it comes to their lawlessness, them not following various permit process and things of that nature.
Rashida Tlaib's comments are devastating because they strip away the geopolitical veneer. She isn't talking about U.S.-Canada relations. She is talking about lawlessness and bribery. By aligning himself with the Moroun family, Trump has alienated the very working-class voters in Michigan he claims to represent. These voters want the new bridge. They want the jobs, the reduced traffic, and the safety. By threatening to block it, Trump isn't looking tough on Canada. He looks like a puppet for the elites. This is the chaos agent effect. Trump's impulsive decision to do a favor for a donor has triggered a congressional investigation that could paralyze his trade agenda. He handed his political enemies a weapon, and they are using it to bludgeon his administration's credibility. While Trump is fighting off subpoenas and accusations of corruption, Canada's hands are clean. We didn't interfere in their politics. We simply built a bridge and let their corruption expose itself. The revolt has now moved from rhetoric to legislation. Congresswoman Hillary Scholten has introduced the Michigan-Canada Partnership Act, a bill designed specifically to strip the president of the power to block the bridge. Think about the irony. A U.S. president is being blocked by his own lawmakers from interfering with a Canadian project. Let's analyze Mark Carney's role here as a grandmaster. A lesser strategist would have panicked when Trump threatened the bridge. They would have issued counter-threats, imposed retaliatory tariffs, or flown to Washington to beg. Carney did none of that. He exercised strategic patience. Carney understood a fundamental truth about American politics. It is deeply divided. He knew that if Trump attacked a project that benefits Michigan, Michigan would fight back. By remaining disciplined, Carney allowed the Ambassador Bridge scandal to fester until it exploded. Carney's options are now limitless. First, he can sit back and watch U.S. Oversight committees tear apart the Commerce Department's rationale. Second, he can push to open the bridge early, creating facts on the ground that no tweet can undo. And third, he can now go to global partners and say, look, the U.S. isn't negotiating on trade. They are negotiating for private monopolies. This erodes Trump's leverage globally. If Germany, Japan, or Mexico sees that U.S. policy can be bought by a bridge owner, they will stop taking Washington's national security threats seriously. Trump didn't just hurt his position with Canada, he showed his hand to the world. As the dust settles, the picture becomes clear. Donald Trump attempted to execute a power move. He wanted to hold a vital piece of infrastructure hostage to extract concessions from Canada. Instead, he walked into a trap of his own making. He is now facing a congressional investigation. He has alienated key voters in a swing state, and he has exposed his administration to accusations of billionaire favoritism that refute his entire populist platform. This is the difference between a chaos agent and a quiet superpower. The United States under Trump is loud, reactive, and transactional. Canada, under this new strategic doctrine, is quiet, calculated, and resilient. The Gordie Howe International Bridge will open. It is inevitable. The concrete is poured, the cables are strung, and the international agreements are binding. But when the first truck crosses that span, it won't just be a victory for trade. It will be a monument to a strategic victory where Canada stood its ground, refused to be bullied, and watched as its opponent defeated himself. The investigation is just beginning, and we will be here for every subpoena. Subscribe to Canada SR, because in this game of shadows, we shine the light.